My HOA president just tried to evict me from my own house. Picture this, 6:30 a.m. I'm still smelling like diesel fuel from an all-night electrical job, and this woman in $300 yoga pants hands me an eviction notice. For my house. The house I own free and clear. 30 days to vacate, Dolores Blackwood says, her acrylic nails clicking against her fake legal clipboard. Don't take it personally, sweetie. The sound of her Mercedes door slamming still echoes in my head. Personally? Lady, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Because what Dolores didn't know was that I'd been quietly watching, documenting, recording everything she'd been doing to me and my neighbors for months. And when I walked into that courtroom with my evidence, the judge's face said it all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this nightmare started. What would you do if someone tried to steal your paid-off home? Where are you watching from? Drop those HOA horror stories below. This gets wild. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this war. I'm Marcus Thornfield, Mac to everyone who matters. 52, electrician for 30 years, recently divorced from a woman who thought my blue-collar paycheck wasn't good enough for her country club dreams. When the divorce settlement hit, I did something that shocked everyone. Bought a house with cash, not some McMansion, a solid 1970s ranch in Willowbrook Estates. The smell of old wood and honest work still clung to the walls. 3 bedrooms, corner lot, and 0 debt. For the first time in decades, I could sleep without worrying about mortgage payments. Willowbrook was paradise for a guy like me. 47 houses filled with working families who minded their own business. Kids played in the streets. Mrs. Isla next door brought dumplings that tasted like heaven. The Rodriguezes across the street became my unofficial family. For 2 perfect years, life was simple. Then she arrived. Dolores Blackwood moved in from Eastbrook Heights after her husband's construction company got busted for fraud. Apparently, financial disgrace doesn't sit well with a woman who'd spent 20 years looking down her nose at lesser neighborhoods. Picture this, 5'4" in designer sneakers, blonde hair that defies physics, always dressed for yoga classes she never attends. Her white Mercedes GLE with Dolores 1 vanity plates announced her arrival like a storm warning. The diesel rumble of that engine became our neighborhood's air raid siren. When drainage problems hit in 2019, most working folks couldn't attend the emergency HOA formation meeting. Dolores volunteered as president. Nobody else wanted the headache, so boom, we had our new overlord. The harassment started immediately. Mrs. Isla got fined for garden gnomes, aesthetic violations. The Rodriguezes got cited because their kids drew hopscotch with chalk. Defacement of common property, the notice claimed. But I was her special project. 3 months after Dolores took power, I found a violation notice stuck to my door like a parking ticket. My cedar fence, installed in 1973, older than some of my neighbors, was suddenly an unapproved structure. Fine, $150. Deadline, 30 days. That evening, I knocked on her door. Expensive vanilla candles filled the air with their sickeningly sweet perfume as she answered in full makeup at 8 p.m. "Oh, hi there, Mac," she purred with that smile that looked painted on. "I was wondering when you'd stop by." "This fence predates your HOA by 46 years, I said, keeping my voice steady. "How is it suddenly illegal?" Her laugh sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Rules are rules, sweetie. That old thing doesn't meet current community standards." Sweetie. That word dripped with enough condescension to choke a horse. "What standards? Nobody voted on fence regulations." "The board makes decisions for the community's benefit," she said, examining her manicured nails. The click of her acrylic tips against the doorframe sounded like a timer counting down. "I'm sure a handyman like you can handle a simple fence removal." Handyman, not electrician. Handyman. Like 30 years of licensed electrical work meant nothing. "And if I refuse?" Her smile widened. "Oh, Mac, you don't want to go down that road. I have resources you can't imagine." The door closed with a soft thud that somehow felt like a gunshot. Standing in my driveway, violation notice crumpled in my fist. I realized this wasn't about fences or community standards. This was about power, control. And for whatever reason, Dolores Blackwood had decided I was her test case. She wanted to see how far she could push before I broke. What Dolores didn't know was that electricians don't break easily. We troubleshoot. We trace problems back to their source, and we fix things permanently. The war had officially begun. Here's where things got interesting. And by interesting, I mean absolutely infuriating. I spent that weekend removing 20 feet of perfectly good cedar fence. 40-year-old wood that was stronger than half the new construction in town, but apparently it offended Dolores's delicate sensibilities. The smell of cedar dust filled my garage as I carefully saved every board. Electricians' habit of never throwing away anything useful. Monday morning, I'm loading my work van when her white Mercedes creeps down the street like a shark circling prey. Dolores steps out in her daily uniform of yoga pants and superiority, clipboard in hand. "Problem solved," I called out, wiping sawdust off my hands. She walked my entire perimeter, designer sneakers crunching on fresh gravel. Then she stopped at the remaining backyard section, the part that bothered absolutely nobody. "This won't do at all," she announced, clicking her pen like a metronome. "What won't do? I removed what you complained about." "The remaining fence uses non-compliant materials. Cedar wasn't approved by the architectural committee." I blinked. "What architectural committee? This fence is from 1973. The board retroactively established material standards last week." She handed me another violation notice on paper, so expensive it probably cost more per sheet than my lunch. "Complete removal required. Fine. $300. Now here's something I learned during my divorce. When someone starts making up rules as they go, you need documentation. Sarah's lawyer taught me that the hard way when she tried claiming I'd agreed to things I'd never heard of. "You can't retroactively change rules for pre-existing structures," I said. "Actually, I can." That razor-sharp smile again. "I'm the president, Mac. Property values are my responsibility." That night, I drove to the county records office. The musty smell of old filing cabinets and decades of bureaucratic paperwork filled my nostrils as I started digging. 3 hours later, surrounded by covenant documents and formation papers, I hit gold. The original HOA covenants, clear as day. Pre-existing structures installed prior to HOA formation shall be grandfathered under previous neighborhood standards. Signed, notarized, legally binding. I photocopied everything, the machine's mechanical hum becoming my victory song. 43 pages proving Dolores was either lying or incompetent. Tuesday night's HOA meeting felt like walking into court. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as 15 homeowners sat in squeaky folding chairs. I brought my evidence folder, feeling bulletproof. "Before we start," I announced, spreading documents across the front table, "let's discuss these fence violations." Dolores's smile flickered. "The board's decision stands, Mac." "Based on what authority?" "Because your own filed covenants specifically protect pre-existing structures." Mrs. Isla leaned forward from the back row. A couple people pulled out phones. Dolores barely glanced at my evidence. "Those are technicalities. The grandfathering clause expired with our updated standards." "Show me where it says that." "It's implied in our governance structure." "Implied? You're fining me $300 on something implied?" The room went dead quiet except for those awful buzzing lights. "Mac," Dolores said with that tone kindergarten teachers use on difficult children, "emotional outbursts won't change anything." "Emotional outbursts. Right. Then I want copies of the current bylaws." "Certainly. $50 administrative fee for copying. $50 for photocopies." I slapped the cash on her table. "Everything. Bylaws, standards, meeting minutes, financial records." "Some documents require board approval. Public HOA records need approval?" That's when Dolores showed her true colors. She accidentally knocked over her coffee cup, sending hot liquid across my carefully organized evidence. 3 hours of research turned into soggy pulp. "Oh my goodness, how clumsy!" she exclaimed, grabbing napkins with Oscar-worthy concern. The coffee smell mixed with wet paper created this nauseating aroma that perfectly captured my feelings watching my documentation dissolve. But here's the beauty of being detail-oriented. I'd made copies before leaving the house. 2 weeks later, my complete HOA package arrived. 17 pages of obviously butchered bylaws with missing sections, inconsistent formatting, and contradictory rules. A kindergartner could see these documents had been tampered with. You know what's funny? Dolores probably thought destroying my evidence would end this. What she didn't realize was that property records are public information and there's always more where that came from. Plus, now I had documentation of her destroying homeowner documents during an official meeting. That coffee spill just gave me 2 violations for the price of 1. The original fence harassment and evidence tampering. Standing in my kitchen that night, looking at those pathetic edited bylaws, I realized something important. This wasn't about fences or community standards or property values. This was about power, control, and testing how far she could push before I broke. What Dolores didn't know was that she just picked a fight with someone who troubleshoots problems for a living. Game on. 2 weeks after the fence fiasco, Dolores decided to escalate. Apparently, humiliating herself with the coffee spill wasn't enough education for one lifetime. I woke up Tuesday morning to find a bright yellow ticket fluttering on my work van like a neon butterfly having an identity crisis. The adhesive was still tacky. Whoever stuck this thing on had done it recently. Very recently. Violation, commercial vehicle overnight parking, $200 fine plus $50 daily until resolved. Commercial vehicle? I stared at my basic Ford Transit with Thornfield electrical on the sides. Nothing fancy, nothing oversized, just standard working man transportation that's been parked in the same spot for 2 years without attracting anything except the occasional curious squirrel. The citation was signed by Dolores Blackwood, time-stamped 6:47 a.m. I checked my watch, 7:15. This woman had been prowling my street before most people's coffee makers kicked on, hunting violations like a caffeinated bloodhound. Fresh coffee aroma drifted from my kitchen, mixing with morning air and the lingering diesel exhaust from her Mercedes. She'd probably watched me discover her little surprise from her front window, savoring the moment like fine wine. I called the number on the ticket. She answered before the first ring finished. Willowbrook HOA, President Blackwood speaking. It's Mac. What's this commercial vehicle garbage? Oh, hi, Mac. That syrupy fake cheerfulness could rot teeth at 50 yards. Emergency board meeting last night. Commercial vehicles attract criminal elements to family neighborhoods. Criminal elements. Because clearly electricians are notorious for their crime sprees between service calls. My van's been here 2 years without attracting anything except mosquitoes and the neighbor's cat. New rules require immediate compliance, sweetie. 24 hours to relocate or face escalating penalties. Here's the problem nobody thinks about. That van contains $15,000 of specialized tools. Wire strippers, conduit benders, testing equipment collected over 30 years of troubleshooting other people's electrical disasters. My entire livelihood rides in that vehicle. Plus, insurance only covers the tools when secured in my driveway or active job sites. Where exactly should I park it? Street parking on Maple Street works perfectly. Only 8 blocks away. 8 blocks. In a neighborhood where tool theft happens so regularly, the police have a special task force. How convenient. What about emergency calls? I'm on hospital rotation. I'm sure a resourceful handyman like you will figure something out. Blessed day. The line died with a click that sounded suspiciously like a mousetrap snapping. Now getting screwed in divorce court teaches you valuable lessons about verifying legal claims. Sarah's lawyer tried similar tactics with emergency property restrictions that turned out to violate state law. So that afternoon, I hit the public library like a man possessed. 3 hours later, jackpot. State commerce protection statutes specifically prohibit HOAs from restricting licensed trade vehicles under 10,000 pounds when parked on owner's property. The law exists precisely to prevent this kind of harassment targeting working people. But here's where karma gets interesting. While researching, I spotted something beautiful in Dolores's driveway photos I'd taken for documentation. Her precious Mercedes sported massive real estate decals covering half the rear window. Blackwood Luxury Properties, your dream home awaits. Commercial advertising on a personal vehicle, parked overnight in residential driveway. Every single night. The irony was so thick you could slice it and serve it at Sunday dinner. Wednesday morning, loading my van, I heard that familiar Mercedes rumble approaching. This time she brought backup. Some guy in a fluorescent vest was attaching a bright yellow boot to my front wheel like he was gift wrapping a present nobody wanted. What's this supposed to be? I jogged over, tools jangling. Non-compliance enforcement, the guy mumbled, avoiding eye contact. His vest read Metro Parking Solutions. Professional car thieves with business cards. Dolores supervised like a general directing battlefield operations. Morning, Mac. I did mention that deadline. I pulled out my phone, hitting record. You're booting a vehicle in a private driveway? Community safety requires enforcement, she announced to my camera with that plastic politician smile. Commercial vehicles attract undesirable elements. Boot guy handed me a pink removal notice. $200 to unlock my own van in my own driveway. The audacity was genuinely impressive, but Dolores just made her biggest mistake yet. I called county sheriff. Deputy Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later, surveyed the scene, and started laughing. Not polite chuckling, full-blown belly laughing like he'd discovered the world's best comedy show happening in my driveway. Ma'am, he told Dolores while wiping tears, booting vehicles on private property without court orders is called theft. Pretty serious theft, actually. Her face cycled through colors like a mood ring having a nervous breakdown. HOA Enforcement Authority. Covers public areas, maybe. This is his property, that he owns. Rodriguez pointed at boot guy. Remove it now, before I arrest both of you for criminal mischief. That boot disappeared faster than free beer at a construction site. As they fled, Rodriguez quietly handed me his card. Document everything. This woman's building a federal case against herself. That evening, reviewing the day's footage, one thing became crystal clear. Dolores wasn't just getting desperate, she was getting stupid. Just when I thought Dolores had exhausted her creativity, she pulled out the nuclear option. And by nuclear option, I mean a scheme so breathtakingly audacious it belonged in a masterclass on suburban warfare. 3 weeks after the boot fiasco, I found an envelope under my door thick enough to stop a bullet, hand-delivered during the night like some kind of real estate ninja had struck while I slept. The paper felt heavier than my mortgage documents used to, expensive stock with embossed letterhead that screamed, "I spent your mortgage payment intimidating you." Property value depreciation assessment, immediate payment required. The smell of that premium paper mixed with my morning coffee created this stomach-churning combination that perfectly matched my mood reading the contents. According to this literary masterpiece, a professional property assessor had determined my humble ranch house was destroying neighborhood values by $30,000, 30 grand, for existing while blue collar. The assessment bore the signature of one Richard Blackwood, certified property evaluation specialist. Blackwood. Because apparently keeping corruption in the family is a tradition older than Sunday dinner. According to Dick's expert analysis, my property's substandard maintenance, inappropriate landscaping, and non-conforming architectural elements were single-handedly tanking everyone's equity. His solution? Pay a depreciation assessment of $47,500 to compensate affected neighbors. Alternatively, Dolores's real estate company would graciously purchase my property for the fire sale price of $180,000, a bargain considering it appraised at $285,000 just last year. The purchase contract was already attached, complete with a move-out clause requiring vacation within 10 days. How thoughtfully efficient. Now here's something I learned during my divorce that every homeowner should know when lawyers demand immediate payment for fabricated damages with impossible deadlines. They're not actually expecting payment. They're forcing panic decisions while you're too overwhelmed to think straight. I called Rebecca Martinez, the real estate attorney who'd saved my skin during the divorce proceedings. Her laughter was so violent I genuinely worried she might require medical attention. Mac, this is either the most incompetent fraud attempt in legal history or elaborate performance art, possibly both. So it's bullshit? Complete bullshit. HOAs cannot impose special assessments for subjective property value claims without documented expenses and homeowner votes. This is extortion wearing a business suit. Rebecca recommended an actual certified appraiser, emphasis on actual as opposed to whatever Dick Blackwood was pretending to be. James Morrison arrived Thursday in a sensible Honda, armed with legitimate credentials and zero family connections to power-hungry HOA dictators. He spent 3 hours measuring, photographing, and evaluating everything from foundation to roof shingles with the methodical precision of someone who actually knew what they were doing. His report arrived Friday afternoon like Christmas morning. According to legitimate professional assessment, my improvements, new electrical panel, updated wiring, fresh exterior paint, had increased neighborhood values by approximately $15,000. But wait, it gets better. A quick check with state licensing boards revealed that Dick Blackwood wasn't certified to assess anything more complex than his own pulse. No license, no credentials, no legitimate qualifications beyond sharing DNA with Dolores. The guy was about as professionally certified as a fortune cookie. Armed with real documentation, I started connecting dots. Public records showed Blackwood luxury properties had been unusually busy in our neighborhood. 3 houses sold in 18 months, all listed exclusively by Dolores's company. Coincidentally, all 3 previous owners had endured similar HOA harassment campaigns before mysteriously deciding to relocate. The pattern was gorgeous in its simplicity. Terrorize homeowners with escalating fines and bogus assessments until they panic sell below market value. List properties through your own company, flip them to unsuspecting buyers at full price, pocket the massive difference. Evil genius level stuff, really. Monday night's emergency HOA meeting smelled like industrial disinfectant and shattered dreams as 20-odd homeowners squeezed into folding chairs designed by someone who clearly hated human spines. We're addressing a serious threat to community financial stability, Dolores announced, waving Dick's fake assessment like evidence at a murder trial. I stood up with Morrison's legitimate report. Before discussing threats to financial stability, let's examine your brother-in-law's complete lack of professional credentials. Her plastic smile cracked like cheap veneer. I don't understand. Dick Blackwood isn't licensed to assess property values anywhere in this state. His credentials are fiction. His report is worthless. I spread Morrison's documentation across the front table. According to an actual licensed professional, my improvements increased neighborhood values by $15,000. Phones appeared like magic as neighbors started recording this beautiful disaster. Furthermore, I continued, enjoying every second, your real estate company has exclusively listed every property sold after HOA harassment campaigns. Remarkable coincidence. Instead of backpedaling or deflecting, Dolores made the mistake of doubling down like a gambling addict at closing time. This community will not be held hostage by one selfish homeowner, she shrieked, her voice hitting frequencies that probably violated noise ordinances. If Mac Thornfield refuses to support neighborhood stability, perhaps he should find somewhere else to live? Mrs. Isla's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Are you threatening him with forced relocation? I'm protecting everyone's investment, Dolores snarled, all pretense of civility evaporating. Walking to my truck afterward, surrounded by neighbors sharing their own harassment stories, everything crystallized. This wasn't governance gone wrong or power-drunk leadership. This was racketeering in yoga pants. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source, Dolores's own stupidity. After that train wreck HOA meeting where she'd basically confessed to racketeering in front of 20 neighbors with smartphones, I decided to stop playing defense. Rebecca Martinez had dropped a bombshell during our call. HOAs are quasi-governmental entities, Mac. Their financial records are public information. Public information. Those words bounced around my skull like a pinball finding its target. Wednesday morning, I walked into the county clerk's office feeling like a man with a winning lottery ticket. The clerk, a battle-hardened woman who'd probably survived every bureaucratic apocalypse since the Carter administration, pulled up our records without missing a beat. Willowbrook Estates HOA, she said, fingers flying across keys with the rhythm of someone who'd done this dance 10,000 times. Annual filings? Here we go. The documents she handed me hit like a sledgehammer to the gut. $127,000. Gone. Vanished like a magician's rabbit. Except this trick involved systematic theft disguised as community management. The landscaping contract made my eyes water, not from emotion, but from sheer audacity. $48,000 annually to Green Valley Maintenance for maintaining our extensive common areas. Our common areas consist of 2 entrance signs and maybe 300 square feet of grass that I could trim with nail clippers during commercial breaks. Green Valley's business address? Same as Dolores's sister's catering company, because apparently making sandwiches qualifies you for landscape architecture. Snow removal was pure comedy gold. $45,000 annually for a region that saw 2 actual snowfalls last winter, both barely enough to dust a car windshield. Mountain Peak Snow Services shared an address with Dolores's nephew's lawn care business, which probably meant they cleared our imaginary blizzards with the same mower they used for summer grass. But the crown jewel was Neighborhood Watch Solutions, $37,000 for installing security cameras that existed only in Dolores's creative accounting universe. I'd walked every street in our neighborhood. The only cameras belonged to individual homeowners protecting their own property. The musty smell of decades-old filing systems mixed with fresh photocopy toner as I documented everything, hands trembling between rage and anticipation. Here's something most people don't know about embezzlement. It's not just theft. It's federal mail fraud when conducted through official correspondence, which bumps penalties into serious prison time territory. That evening, spreading evidence across my kitchen table like a detective solving a murder case, the full scope hit me. Dolores hadn't just been harassing individual homeowners. She'd been operating a criminal enterprise disguised as community governance. Every bogus fine, every fake violation, every harassment campaign had fed cash into her family's network of shell companies. She'd weaponized our HOA into her personal money laundering operation while simultaneously running forced sale scams on targeted properties. My phone buzzed. Rebecca Martinez. Mac, I've been researching your situation. We need federal backup. HOA embezzlement typically involves wire fraud, mail fraud, and RICO violations when there's ongoing criminal conspiracy. RICO. The same laws that toppled organized crime families were about to crush a suburban real estate scammer in yoga pants. How serious is federal involvement? FBI white-collar crime serious. They salivate over these cases. Easy prosecutions with massive public relations benefits. Politicians get to protect middle-class homeowners while looking tough on corruption. Lying in bed that night, staring at ceiling shadows cast by streetlights, I experienced something unexpected. Not fear, liberation. This had never been about community standards or property maintenance or neighborhood harmony. This had been about organized theft. And Dolores Blackwood had been running a criminal operation that would make Tony Soprano proud. She'd picked the wrong neighborhood to rob. More importantly, she'd picked the wrong electrician to screw with. Because once you trace an electrical problem back to its source, fixing it becomes beautifully simple. You just flip the right switch and watch everything shut down. Time to build the dream team that would make Dolores wish she'd picked a different hobby than amateur racketeering. Rebecca Martinez arranged our war council at Murphy's Diner, the kind of place where working people solve real problems over coffee that could strip paint while politicians debate nonsense on cable news. The vinyl booths smelled like decades of honest conversations and bacon-grease justice. "Mac, meet Troy Adamson from Channel 7 Investigative," Rebecca said, gesturing to a guy who looked like Central Casting's idea of a crusading reporter. Perfectly pressed shirt, notebook already out, eyes that probably saw corruption in grocery store receipts. Troy's handshake felt like he'd confronted more crooked officials than most people meet at church socials. "Rebecca says you've got HOA fraud with federal teeth. My viewers devour this stuff. Suburban corruption, working families getting screwed, rich people discovering consequences exist. And this is Elena Vasquez, State Attorney General's white-collar crime division." Elena looked like she could prosecute a RICO case before breakfast and still have energy to deadlift a Buick. Sharp suit, sharper stare, handshake that suggested she'd sent plenty of country club criminals to federal accommodations. "We've been tracking HOA fraud patterns statewide," Elena said, opening a tablet thick enough to stop bullets. "Your situation matches a model we're seeing, systematic embezzlement combined with forced property acquisition. If we prove ongoing criminal enterprise, we're talking decades in federal prison." The next week felt like preparing for D-Day, if D-Day involved spreadsheets and subpoenas instead of landing craft. Elena's forensic accountant, Patricia, a quiet woman who could trace dirty money like a bloodhound following bacon scent, discovered Dolores's operation made Enron look amateur. Shell companies nested inside shell companies, all feeding the Blackwood family money machine. "Look at this beautiful disaster," Patricia said, spreading bank statements across Rebecca's conference table like tarot cards predicting financial doom. HOA funds flow to Green Valley Maintenance, which subcontracts to Mountain Peak Snow Services, which pays consulting fees to Neighborhood Development Solutions, which transfers profits to Blackwood Luxury Properties. It's money laundering disguised as suburban landscaping. The scope kept expanding like a horror movie franchise. $847,000 stolen from multiple HOA accounts across 3 counties over 2 years. Dolores hadn't just robbed us. She'd been running the same scam on half the state. Here's something most people don't know about RICO prosecutions. They require proving a pattern of criminal activity over time, which means investigators love detailed documentation of repeated offenses. Every harassment incident, every bogus fine, every intimidation tactic becomes evidence of ongoing criminal enterprise. Troy started interviewing neighbors, discovering Mrs. Isla was basically a one-woman intelligence operation. 18 months of meticulous documentation, violation notices, fine schedules, meeting minutes, even photos of Dolores parking illegally while issuing parking violations to others. "Your neighbor survived authoritarian government," Troy explained after spending 3 hours at Mrs. Isla's kitchen table, surrounded by evidence folders that would make FBI agents weep with joy. "She knows how to document abuse of power." The Rodriguezes contributed their own nightmare stories. Threats, intimidation, attempts to force relocation through escalating fines for children playing in their own yard. Young families with limited English and no legal resources, perfect targets for predators like Dolores. But victim testimony wasn't enough. We needed Dolores caught red-handed. That's where 30 years of electrical troubleshooting became relevant. Complex system failures teach you to think systematically, anticipate problems, and prepare redundant solutions for when primary plans explode. I installed motion-activated cameras around my property, completely legal surveillance on my own land, hidden units positioned to capture harassment incidents without detection. Nothing fancy, just standard security equipment with strategic placement and backup power supplies. Elena suggested psychological warfare. "Dolores is getting desperate. Desperate criminals make spectacular mistakes. If we can provoke her into obvious illegal behavior while recording everything." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. I would fake surrender, request formal meeting to negotiate terms, ensuring maximum witnesses while documenting everything. Make Dolores feel victorious enough to reveal her complete operation. Rebecca prepared documents that looked like capitulation but were actually federal subpoenas ready for service. Elena coordinated with FBI agents who would be positioned nearby like invisible backup singers. Troy arranged camera crews under the guise of filming human interest story about neighborhood conflict resolution. Overconfident criminals always confess, Elena explained with the wisdom of someone who'd watched dozens of white-collar cases implode. They can't resist explaining how clever they've been. We scheduled the community center showdown, invited all homeowners, and spread word through Mrs. Isla's informal network that Mac Thornfield was finally surrendering. The night before our operation, surrounded by legal documents and evidence files, I felt something unexpected, complete calm, like the moment before flipping a breaker that fixes a complex electrical problem. Dolores Blackwood had spent 2 years destroying lives for profit, targeting vulnerable families, stealing community funds, turning neighborhood governance into organized crime. Tomorrow, her criminal empire would short-circuit permanently, and I had front-row seats to watch the fireworks. Dolores must have developed some kind of sixth sense about impending doom because suddenly she abandoned subtle harassment for full-blown suburban warfare. It started 3 days after I'd agreed to discuss her buyout terms. I dragged myself home from a midnight emergency at the hospital. Some medical genius had attempted DIY electrical work on surgical equipment and nearly turned the cardiac unit into a fireworks display, only to discover my basement had become an indoor lake. Not just wet, flooded, like someone had declared aquatic warfare on my foundation. The smell hit me first, that nauseating combination of wet concrete, ruined copper wire, and decades of stored electrical equipment dissolving into expensive soup. Water lapped at my ankles as I sloshed toward the main shutoff, surveying damage that probably cost more than most people's cars. Someone had systematically destroyed my sprinkler control valve with what looked like industrial bolt cutters, then apparently stuck around to admire their handiwork while my basement transformed into a very expensive swimming pool. $15,000 in damage, minimum, not counting the irreplaceable vintage electrical testing equipment that was now submarine-grade scrap metal. But here's where Dolores made her first spectacular mistake of the sabotage era. My new security cameras had been rolling all night. The footage was absolutely gorgeous. Crystal clear video of 2 guys in dark hoodies approaching at 2:47 a.m. with professional demolition tools, working with the methodical precision of people who'd done this before. Even better, one genius drove away in a white pickup sporting Mountain Peak Landscaping in cheerful letters across the tailgate. You know, Dolores's nephew's company that somehow qualified for those phantom $45,000 snow removal contracts. The next morning, loading my van for another hospital call, I heard the familiar hiss of dying dreams. All 4 tires, slashed through the sidewalls with surgical precision while I'd been playing submarine captain in my basement. This hit where it hurt most, my livelihood. Emergency electrical calls don't reschedule for tire repairs, and missing hospital rotation could cost me that contract permanently. I ended up renting a truck at rates that would make loan sharks blush, just to keep working. But wait, there's more. Like a late-night infomercial from hell, Dolores had additional surprises. While I was at the tire shop getting new rubber installed, someone called the state licensing board with completely fabricated complaints about my hospital work. Alleged safety violations, patient endangerment, unauthorized modifications, creative fiction that would make Stephen King jealous. The licensing investigator showed up Friday morning looking like an accountant who'd lost a bet with life. Thick glasses, thicker bureaucratic manual, and the personality of wet cardboard. "This is extremely serious, Mr. Thornfield," he intoned, adjusting spectacles that probably cost more than my daily wages. "Patient safety violations carry criminal penalties. Criminal penalties. For work I'd never done. Violations existing only in Dolores's increasingly deranged imagination. Here's something most people don't know about professional licensing. Complaints trigger automatic investigations regardless of merit, and your license gets suspended pending resolution. No work, no income, no way to fight back while bureaucrats investigate fairy tales." That afternoon brought the cherry on this disaster Sunday. Deputy Rodriguez called with news that made my head spin. "Mac, we've got a problem. Someone filed domestic violence allegations claiming you've been threatening a female neighbor." The taste of bitter rage mixed with afternoon coffee as I processed this latest assault. Who filed it? Anonymous tip through the domestic violence hotline. Claims you've been making verbal threats against Dolores Blackwood, stalking behavior, intimidation tactics. The system was designed to protect genuine victims, which made it perfect for weaponization by predators like Dolores. Anonymous complaints trigger automatic investigations. Restraining orders get issued based on allegations alone. Her word against mine. with legal presumption favoring the victim. Rodriguez, you know this is complete bullshit. I know, but I have to investigate. Protocol. His voice carried the bone-deep exhaustion of good cops forced to waste time on fabricated crimes while real criminals operate freely. Document everything, Mac. This woman's building a case that's going to explode in her face. Monday's mail delivery brought the legal masterpiece, a restraining order prohibiting approach within 500 feet of Dolores Blackwood or her property, which would have been manageable except her house sat directly between mine and the only road exit from our neighborhood. Technically, I couldn't leave my own neighborhood without violating a court order. The beautiful irony tasted like copper pennies as I read the legal document. Dolores had effectively placed me under house arrest using the justice system as her personal enforcement army. But here's the thing about systematic criminal harassment. It creates documented patterns, and patterns become prosecutable evidence when you're recording everything. My cameras caught the landscaping truck during sprinkler destruction. Phone records would trace anonymous tips to burner phones purchased near Dolores's office. The licensing complaint contained insider details about hospital electrical systems that only contractors with recent access could know. That evening, Elena called with news that made everything click into focus. Mac, she's accelerating because she's panicked. This harassment level suggests someone who knows law enforcement is closing in. So what's her end game? Complete financial and legal destruction. Break you so thoroughly that selling becomes your only survival option. Sitting in my kitchen that night, surrounded by evidence of escalating crimes, I realized Dolores had made the mistake of her criminal career. She thought increasing pressure would make me fold faster. Instead, she just provided enough federal felonies to guarantee decades in prison. With my electrical license suspended and a restraining order keeping me trapped in my own neighborhood like some kind of suburban prisoner, Dolores decided to go for the nuclear option. The lawsuit arrived via process server Thursday morning, a kid who looked like he'd rather be delivering pizza than legal documents that could destroy people's lives. $500,000 in defamation damages for allegedly ruining Dolores's reputation through malicious harassment and false accusations. $500,000. The legal brief was a masterpiece of creative writing, claiming my obsessive behavior and unfounded allegations had damaged her real estate business, caused emotional distress, and somehow endangered her family's safety. According to this work of fiction, I was basically a domestic terrorist with a tool belt. But the real genius move came buried on page 17, a motion for emergency asset seizure to protect defendants' ability to pay damages. They wanted to freeze my bank accounts, put a lien on my house, and essentially render me financially dead while the case worked through the courts. The smell of expensive legal paper mixed with my cheap coffee created this nauseating combination that perfectly captured my mood reading this latest assault. Dolores wasn't just trying to steal my house anymore. She was attempting complete financial annihilation. That afternoon brought even better news. My boss at Thornfield Electrical, technically myself since I was self-employed, received a call from the hospital district. Due to ongoing legal issues and licensing concerns, my emergency services contract was being temporarily suspended pending resolution. No license, no income, no way to pay for legal defense against a $500,000 lawsuit. The noose was tightening with surgical precision. But here's where Dolores's psychological profiling failed her completely. She'd been operating under the assumption that I was some working-class pushover who'd collapse under sufficient pressure. What she didn't understand was that electricians don't break, we troubleshoot. I called Elena Vasquez that evening. They're trying to seize my assets before I can fight back. Standard white-collar intimidation, Elena said with the calm of someone who'd seen this playbook before. Overwhelming legal pressure designed to force immediate capitulation. But Mac, they just made a critical error. How so? Emergency asset seizure requires probable cause of actual damages. Dolores will have to present evidence in court next week under oath, explaining exactly how you damaged her business. And will be there with federal agents, recording everything she says for her upcoming criminal trial. Meanwhile, the neighborhood pressure campaign intensified. Someone had been spreading medical rumors about my psychological instability. Claims that I was suffering from post-divorce mental breakdown, making irrational decisions, possibly dangerous to myself and others. Mrs. Isla told me Saturday morning that 3 different neighbors had expressed concern about my behavior, suggesting maybe I needed professional help to deal with my obvious stress issues. The gossip network was operating with military efficiency, Even worse, someone had convinced the homeowners to sign a petition requesting my voluntary commitment for psychological evaluation, 17 signatures demanding I be institutionalized for the safety of the community. The petition smelled like Dolores's vanilla candles when Mrs. Isla showed it to me, artificial, cloying, designed to mask something rotten underneath. But the beautiful thing about systematic harassment campaigns is they create paper trails. Every false allegation, every forged signature, every abuse of legal process becomes evidence of criminal conspiracy. Sunday evening brought the final escalation attempt. Dolores's lawyer called with an offer that sounded like negotiations between kidnappers and hostages. "Mr. Thornfield, my client is prepared to be reasonable." The voice oozed through my phone like used car salesman charm. "She'll withdraw all legal actions and drop the asset seizure motion in exchange for immediate property sale at current market value." Current market value. After 18 months of systematic harassment designed to crater my property's worth. What's her definition of current market value? $160,000. Cash sale, 10-day closing, non-disclosure agreement included. $160,000 for a house that appraised at $285,000 last year, plus a gag order preventing me from ever discussing what they'd done. "She's feeling generous today," I said, letting sarcasm drip through the phone line like battery acid. "Mr. Thornfield, I strongly advise accepting this offer. The alternative is complete financial ruin through protracted litigation you cannot afford." "The alternative?" "Right. I'll need to think about it," I said, playing my part in this theatrical performance. "You have 48 hours. After that, the offer expires and litigation proceeds to asset seizure." 48 hours. Just enough time for panic to set in, for rational decision-making to collapse under pressure, for desperation to override common sense. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen reviewing the master plan one final time. Tuesday's community center meeting was set. Federal agents were positioned. Media crews were ready. Legal documents were prepared for immediate service. Dolores had spent months building what she thought was an airtight case for stealing my property. What she'd actually built was an airtight case for her own federal prosecution. In less than 48 hours, her criminal empire would collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane, and I had front row seats to watch justice finally arrive in yoga pants and handcuffs. Tuesday evening arrived like Christmas morning for someone who'd been very, very good all year. The Willowbrook Community Center hadn't seen this much excitement since the Great Bake Sale controversy of 2018. 89 residents packed into folding chairs that squeaked like a symphony of rusty hinges, drawn by word that Mac Thornfield was finally surrendering to HOA President Dolores Blackwood. The smell of industrial floor cleaner mixed with nervous anticipation as neighbors filed in, some clutching popcorn like they were attending dinner theater. Troy Adamson's Channel 7 crew had positioned cameras strategically around the room, ostensibly filming a human interest story about neighborhood conflict resolution. Dolores arrived fashionably late in her white Mercedes, stepping out like a queen approaching her coronation. Designer blazer, perfect hair, briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She'd brought her lawyer plus 3 supportive board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, voice carrying that triumphant tone of someone who believed victory was inevitable. "We're here to resolve a situation that's been disruptive to our community for far too long." I sat in the front row, looking appropriately defeated. Shoulders slumped, head down, the picture of a man who'd finally accepted his fate. Elena Vasquez and Rebecca Martinez sat 3 rows back, appearing to be random concerned citizens rather than federal prosecutors armed with enough evidence to topple a small government. "Mr. Thornfield has requested this meeting to discuss terms for peacefully resolving our property standards dispute," Dolores continued, savoring each word like fine wine. "I'm pleased to announce we've reached an amicable agreement." The crowd murmured appreciatively. Several neighbors nodded approval, probably relieved that the neighborhood drama was finally ending. "Mac," Dolores said, turning to me with that plastic smile that never reached her eyes, "would you like to share your decision with the community?" I stood slowly, pulling a folded document from my jacket pocket. The paper rustled in the sudden quiet as I approached the podium, every eye in the room focused on my apparent surrender. "Thank you, Dolores," I said, voice carrying just the right note of resignation. "You're absolutely right. It's time to resolve this situation once and for all." I unfolded the document, cleared my throat, and began reading in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. "Dolores Blackwood, you are hereby served with a federal subpoena to appear before a grand jury investigating charges of mail fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering under the RICO Act." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Dolores's face cycled through emotions like a broken traffic light: confusion, recognition, disbelief, then growing horror as federal agents stepped forward from their positions around the room. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," announced Agent Sarah Isla, flashing credentials while moving toward the podium. "Dolores Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement of homeowner association funds, and operating a criminal enterprise." The community center erupted. Gasps, shouts, smartphones appearing like magic as everyone started recording simultaneously. Dolores tried to back away from the podium but found herself surrounded by federal agents who'd been strategically positioned throughout the crowd. "This is ridiculous!" she shrieked, her carefully maintained composure shattering like cheap glass. "I'm the victim here. He's been harassing me for months." Troy Adamson stepped forward, microphone in hand, cameras rolling. "Miss Blackwood, how do you respond to evidence showing you embezzled over $800,000 from multiple HOA accounts?" I never. This is a setup." "What about the systematic harassment campaign against homeowners who refused to sell their properties to your real estate company?" Elena Vasquez approached the podium, holding a thick evidence folder. "Ladies and gentlemen, the federal investigation has uncovered extensive documentation of criminal activity spanning 2 years across multiple communities." She opened the folder, displaying bank records on the community center's overhead projector. Fraudulent contracts with shell companies, embezzled funds, systematic harassment of targeted homeowners, and conspiracy to commit mail fraud through abuse of official HOA correspondence. The crowd noise grew louder as neighbors realized the scope of what they'd witnessed. Mrs. Isla stood up in the back row, raising her voice above the chaos. "She tried to steal all our homes. Every family she harassed, every fake fine, every threat, it was all to force us to sell cheap." Dolores, now in handcuffs, made one final desperate attempt at damage control. "You don't understand. I was protecting property values. This neighborhood needed proper management." "By stealing $800,000? Troy asked, shoving his microphone closer. "I never stole anything. Those were legitimate business expenses." Agent Isla smiled grimly. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." As they led Dolores away, the community center erupted in spontaneous applause. 2 years of fear, intimidation, and systematic abuse had finally ended with handcuffs and federal charges. Standing at that podium, watching my tormentor being escorted out in custody while cameras rolled and neighbors cheered, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete satisfaction. Justice had finally arrived in Willowbrook Estates, and it looked absolutely beautiful. 6 months later, justice had been served with all the satisfaction of watching a perfect electrical circuit finally complete. Dolores Blackwood pleaded guilty to 14 federal charges rather than face trial where the evidence could have convicted a corpse. 4 years in federal prison, $2.3 million in restitution, and lifetime banishment from any HOA role ever again. Her criminal network, fake assessor brother-in-law, landscaping nephew, shell company accomplices, all received matching federal accommodations. The judge's sentencing comments still give me goosebumps. In 30 years on this bench, I've rarely witnessed such calculated exploitation of homeowners. This defendant transformed community governance into organized crime, targeting working families and immigrants with systematic harassment designed to steal their homes. My electrical license was reinstated with official apologies and a letter of commendation. The hospital district renewed my contract with a substantial raise for demonstrating exceptional integrity under extreme adversity. Apparently, surviving federal investigations makes excellent job references. The basement restoration, funded by Dolores's frozen assets, resulted in better equipment than what got destroyed. Sometimes karma upgrades your tools while dispensing justice. But the real magic happened in our neighborhood transformation. Mrs. Isla became HOA president by unanimous acclaim, implementing radical concepts like financial transparency and actual democracy. Monthly dues dropped to $35 for legitimate services only. Board meetings transformed into neighborhood social gatherings where the smell of homemade cookies replaced the stench of corruption. The Rodriguez's family started hosting monthly block parties that fill the air with authentic Mexican cooking aromas and children's laughter echoing off houses where families now feel safe. Their kids draw hopscotch squares on every sidewalk without fear of violation notices. Property values jumped 23% after the development threat vanished and word spread about our crime-free governance. Homebuyers apparently prefer neighborhoods where presidents don't moonlight as federal criminals. Our case triggered statewide HOA reform legislation. I testified before lawmakers who actually listened, helping pass the Homeowner Protection Act, requiring damage proof before fines, limiting harassment authority, creating appeal processes for disputed violations. They nicknamed it Max Law in the Capitol, which still makes me smile while drinking morning coffee. The restitution money created something beautiful, the Homeowner Defense Scholarship, providing legal aid for future HOA abuse victims. Mrs. Isla coordinates with immigrant advocacy groups, connecting vulnerable families with resources to fight predatory governance. Sarah and I? Watching your ex-husband systematically dismantle organized crime while maintaining his principles makes a woman reconsider her life choices. We started dating again, taking it slow, building something stronger than our first attempt. She moved back in last month. The engagement ring appeared during a quiet dinner where we discussed second chances and learning from shared battles. Surviving federal criminal investigations together beats traditional couples therapy. Our annual Corruption-Free Community Festival happens this weekend, celebrating diversity, unity, and the simple pleasure of living without fearing your own neighbors. Local media covers it as their favorite feel-good story about ordinary people defeating extraordinary corruption. Here's what this nightmare taught me. Document everything religiously, research your rights thoroughly, build coalitions strategically, and never underestimate patient investigation. Individual resistance usually fails, but organized communities become unstoppable forces. Most importantly, sometimes you must fight for what's yours, even when systems seem designed to crush working people without political connections or unlimited legal budgets. Dolores believed she could steal homes from vulnerable families without consequences. She miscalculated spectacularly. The taste of victory is sweeter than any coffee I've ever brewed. Every morning, I wake up in my paid-off house, in my corruption-free neighborhood, married to the woman I love, surrounded by neighbors who've become genuine friends. The American dream, defended and preserved through ordinary people refusing to surrender to extraordinary greed. Sometimes David really does beat Goliath. Sometimes the system actually works when good people force it to work. Sometimes justice arrives exactly when you need it most. So here's my challenge. Share your HOA nightmare story in the comments below. You might discover how many people have fought similar battles and won. Your experience could help someone else realize they're not powerless against corruption. And if you enjoyed watching justice triumph over suburban tyranny, smash that subscribe button and join the Karen Stories community for more tales of everyday heroes taking on corrupt systems and winning. Because when ordinary people stand up to extraordinary corruption, beautiful things happen. And that's a story worth telling.